Okay, so let's get trucking. Let me look at what it's complaining about here. Core does not contain a definition for display. I was deleting some stuff to simplify what I had here. Where do I have a call to display? I know Core used to have a display method that I took out. I guess I could put that back in. Just do nothing in there. Seems happy now, but does anybody actually call that? I thought I removed all the places that called it. Find references. Only one reference. Or does that only show it in that one thing? Yeah, because the error message was in, I thought box script. Player script? I'm pretty sure I went through and removed it from everywhere. Room script. Not there. Player CS, I don't think it's in there. Box script. Nope. Is it called from somewhere else in core? No. Well, I'll just say display. Yeah, and it does. It tells me, I think it says it's in box script. No, player script, error, core does not contain a definition for display. 27. Here's line 27. So it says get kill count. It's not from core. It's player, get kill count. That doesn't use core. It's almost like it's not recompiling those scripts, because it definitely had that in there before, and I went and took them out trying to like lean out the scripts so we can start focusing on what we're looking at next. And I even closed Unity and relaunched it. Scripts are refreshing here. Error goes away. I guess whatever. All right, well, let's just keep going. The error is gone for right now, but it's probably something weird, or I have to do a build clean thing where all the stuff goes away. Meeting controls. Okay, so for today, you were adding some things that were blocking your path, right? You know, and then using our nav mesh to make the guy kind of chase you, that kind of stuff. How'd that go? Not too bad. Okay, so kind of starting to see some of the power Unity has to do reasonably cool stuff. You know, I think most people who are writing high-end video games maybe wouldn't use Unity's built-in AI stuff for that. It's not the greatest in the world, but it gets the job done for many things. And you'll see sometimes he'll kind of, you probably did see, sometimes he'll get stuck and he'll sit there and kind of twist around and stuff and then just give up, it seems like. And if you drive the player by him, then you can get him to get your attention again. He starts going. So something dropped the ball there. So what I did here, I messed with my game a little bit, is I put my rooms back in here, and I'm in the middle of testing something, but we'll get to that today anyways. So I put my enemy in one place, I put my player in another place. I went through and for all of the rooms in my map, I set up everything to be part of the navigation static. I think maybe the doors are not, but oh, it's the room trigger that's not. That's something I'm going to talk about today. So everything except this new thing that we're going to talk about is part of the navigation static. I did that for every single room. I tried to do it at the prefab level, hoping it would follow through. It didn't seem to, but it's possible. I was talking to several different people, so it's possible that I just whatever. I did something dumb and or the game was running. Probably the game was running. That seems like something I would do. But in any case, so I got the floor and I have all the walls and doors and things like that, all part of the navigation static. Then I went and baked the whole thing. So our final map kind of looks like this. I threw the enemy way up here. I threw the player way down here. I detached the camera from the player. And I have the player kind of hover the camera above. So we're almost looking down on it, kind of like a la Pac-Man or something like that. You know, so now you can kind of see, you know, the guy kind of go through the motions. So he's trying to get to me. Oop, oop. It is cheating. Nobody said I couldn't fly. Yeah, so he's stuck right now. I wonder if it actually is because I flew. Because I can get him unstuck. Yeah. See, he's having a little issue getting around the But then you can just let him kill himself on me, because once he hit him 3 times, he's gone. Oh, he's got me cornered. But in any case, that's something we can do here. All right. So any questions about the nav mesh stuff or nav mesh agents? Does something reasonably interesting, whatever. All right. So the next thing we want to talk about, and we're, you know, I want to start moving towards keeping track of some stuff behind the scenes. We were keeping track of kill count and stuff like that before, where we're using our player objects and our we created the room object. We haven't used it yet. And we talked about maybe having some sort of collision detection inside the room, where when a player enters that room, we let the player object know, like core know, what's the current room the player is in, because that might be handy. So kind of overlaying this with what we were talking about with our text-based MUD we were writing, where at any point in time, a room knew about the player that was in it, and a player knew about what room they were in. And so since we're operating under MVC here, where we have our view, this part, and then we have our controller, which is our code behind, we need to let those two guys know. We want to make sure we're programmatically keeping track of what's the current truth on our screen. So as my player moves between room and room and room, I want to keep track of that stuff. So what I was in the middle of doing is I went into my prefabs. And I went to room. So here's my room. And I added this thing called a room trigger. All he is a cube, but I turned off his mesh renderer. Okay, so if I look at him from the side, he's just a giant cube. I put in an anti-Littman cheat mechanism so I can't fly. I can always go higher. But I will hopefully catch collisions above the walls. So then what I did is I made sure for this box collider that I put the trigger set up as is trigger. Okay. Let's see. So then what I need to do. All right. So let me go ahead and let's just create a room trigger script so we can see that is trigger work. All right. We want to know whenever somebody hits this trigger. and then we'll figure out how can we take that into consideration. All right. Well, actually, I'd make the script in here. So I'll go into my scripts. I'm going to create a new C# script. And we're going to call this guy a room trigger script. I'll go ahead and double click to open that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say on trigger enter. Now, I mentioned this before when we were first looking at colliders, but if you have a collider set up as a trigger, physics won't, it's set up to only be programmatically notified when something happens, not for the guy to bounce off or flip or whatever. Okay, so this is only for code for us to become aware, which is kind of what we want here. You know, we want a player to kind of collide with this hopefully invisible entity. And as soon as he hits it, we become aware then of the oh, you're in this room, the room associated with this room trigger. Okay. So before we had a function called on collision enter. Now we're going to use a function called on trigger enter. And we'll just do a print out entered room. This dot game object dot toString. It's probably going to give us some kind of memory addressy looking thing. Hopefully we'll just see that those are unique. You entered room, blah, 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 and then entered room, a different blah, blah, blah. So we'll know we're triggering entering different rooms. Because I have these guys set up as triggers, these giant white walls should not be impacting me from flying through them. It's just going to look funny. Go to my console, we'll clear this out. Why aren't you showing up? Go back to my room prefab. Oh, I didn't actually add the script to it either, but it's still concerning that it's not showing up in white. So here's my prefabs. Here's my room prefab. I'll go ahead and save. Maybe that's what I didn't do. Maybe I didn't save, and that now has it on all the other ones. So for my room prefab, actually what I'll do is I'll click on just the room trigger. I'm going to go ahead and add the component, the room trigger script, because that's the guy who's listening for triggers being hit. So this is the room trigger, just that white cube there. That guy has a box collider on it. That box collider is a trigger. He has a script associated with it, and that script is listening for triggers being entered. Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah, literally this guy is a cube. He's a cube, and I just stretched him out to fit inside the room, and I made him tall as an anti-cheat Lippmann flying thing. I could still fly higher. I can always go higher. But yeah, he's nothing special. Just game object, 3D cube. Stretched him out to kind of fill the whole room-ish. Put a box collider on him. Made the box collider a trigger, so he wouldn't stop things. You know, otherwise my player will be trying to fly through and just hit it, like hit a wall. I don't want that to happen, but I do want to be notified programmatically when you've entered into this zone. Okay. I haven't yet. Yeah, right now you should see it. That's where we're going. All right, there, that looks better. All right, so there's our game. Oh, of course I can't see my player. Am I at least getting room enter triggers? Yep. Entered room. Oh, the two string literally just calls it by the object name, which is room trigger. It doesn't give me the memory address, but I think we know that. Oh, Ninja just comes up above and dives back in. Super cheat mode. Okay. So obviously, so now those triggers are happening. It's not a lot. It's not keeping my guy from entering the rooms, but clearly this isn't the best view for playing, right? We'd like this guy to look a little different. So I'll go ahead and clear my console. Come back into my project, into my prefabs, go back into room. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on that room trigger cube. And the ideal situation here, and I'm hoping triggers will work even if we're not rendering it. What we've seen before is I've like turned off a game object, right? I just like disabled a game object up there. If I do that, he's no longer in the scene. He's kind of like, hey, I didn't want to delete it because I might want to put him back, but he's not part of the scene anymore. In this case, I want him to be there. I just don't want to see him. So I'm going to just turn off the mesh renderer. So he's no longer going to get rendered on the screen, but he's still there. So I'm hoping that the trigger for the box collider will still exist because I'm still flying around and I should be able to see the rest of the game. And that object is still there. I just can't see it. And the collider was built around that cube. So the collider should still be there because the collider is not something you see. The collider is kind of a invisible wall, if you will. All right, so I'll go ahead and save that. All right, so now we're back to the map where it looks like those things aren't there, but they are still there. They're just not being rendered. That's different than disabling them. So let me click on console. Let's see. Yep, it says entered room. All right, so I'm aware of when I enter the rooms. Now, actually, at this point, everybody who enters a room, it's noticing. If I, Ninja, and look at that cheat. Oh, it still got me as I flew over there. Man, I'm so good at this game. All right. Right now, it's handling, it's anytime anything hits that room trigger, we're notifying stuff. What if I only want to be, what if I'm only interested in when the player hits the room trigger? Long term, we might be interested in more than that, but what's our mechanism? So just seeing if we've learned the stuff we've been doing. What's our mechanism to make sure that we're only aware when a player enters a new room? What could I do? Tags. All right, so make sure your player is tagged with something that you can uniquely identify. So I've tagged him as player, which is built into the tag list. You remember we added a new tag for enemy so that we could flag our enemy. Where's my enemy? We can flag my enemy as an enemy. So now what I can do in that script, instead of just whenever anything enters the trigger, I can say if the thing that entered it, dot game object, dot tag, dot equals player. So only if it was a player that interacted with this guy do I want to do something. So I'll say, here we'll say player entered the room. And if we're interested, we could say else if other dot game object dot tag dot equals. Remember, enemy is all lowercase. That's what we named our tag, enemy in all lowercase. Player was built in and they happen to use a capital P. So I'll become aware of both, but we will prove that we can handle them separately. So we'll say enemy entered the room. All right, so we updated our trigger to be aware of who's entering the room between those two things. Go back into our game. Go ahead. I think I have it set up just for, if you click on the little down arrow next to clear, if you click on clear on play, it'll automatically clear your console whenever you hit the play button. So you don't have to keep remembering it, because, you know, then otherwise it leaves the stuff that was on there from the last time you ran it. So I don't actually have to clear it. It should clear on its own when I hit play here. All right. So now we're seeing that the enemy is entering these different rooms. Now we see the player has entered a room. This guy's never going to catch me. All right. Yeah, see, now he's stuck. I bet you he'd get stuck less often if I had him as a sphere or a capsule, where he can kind of get around those corners a little bit better. I think the sharp edges maybe get stuck a little bit more often. Okay, but I want to make sure we maintain our 700 frames per second on this. It's more of an eye strain issue situation. Okay, so now if we think back to our MUD, what were we trying to accomplish in our MUD? At any point in time, we wanted to know what room a player was in. So, and similarly, a room should know about the players that are currently in it. I don't know how we're going to use that yet, but those are two goals. I want a room to know about the player that's currently in the room, or that there isn't a player in the room. And I want the player to be aware of the room that they're currently in. So based on what we know right now, how can we accomplish this? Keeping in mind that right now, the code that's triggering is inside this room trigger script. And this room trigger script lives inside of, if I go back to my room prefab, it lives inside of this room trigger thing here. And I'll go ahead and turn the renderer back on so we can see it. So it lives inside of this white box. So it's attached to that white box. So now we're really thinking about MVC. I have a visual representation of what we've decided is a room here, right? But programmatically, our trigger is on just this white box. So anytime we enter that white box, that means we have entered a room. That makes sense? That's the actual room. We enter that that white box. So right now, well, so let's I'll leave the question open. So if I want to update some global objects, maybe the object that's governing the player and the object that's governing all our rooms with information about what room the player is currently in, and have the player become aware of the room they're currently in, how can I accomplish that? What would I have to change in my current code? And a hint here would be right now on the entire room prefab is where I have that room script. And what does the room script currently do? When he first comes into existence, he adds this game object to our room game objects. Now, a game object is our visual representation of our room, right? A game object is not an actual room object. We did already, we have not written a room object yet, but we certainly can. So first part of our answer here is we're going to create a room object, right? Room objects are going to keep track of the players that are in it, maybe amongst some other things. So, oh, we did create a room object. So here's our room CS. So this is our starting room object. And notice this guy is not a mono behavior. So since he's not a mono behavior, he's not going to have that start. He's not going to have the update where it happens everything. This is something that just is going to exist in here that we're going to have to manipulate as stuff on the screen is actually occurring. When a player enters one of those triggers, we will find the room object associated with the room that that trigger is physically sitting in and update that guy, letting him know, oh, you have a player. And make sure the guy that the player used to be in that room, we update him and let him know that you don't have a player anymore. And make sure the player at any point in time knows what room they're currently in. Make some sense? All right, so what we have to think about is from a room object perspective, here, let's just say that what's a room going to be interested in? For right now, we're just going to say a room just cares whether or not he has a player or not. Keep it fairly simple. So we'll say this dot the player is equal to null initially. When a room first comes into existence, no players are in the room. Okay, it's going to be a little bit inaccurate at first because we are dropping a player into a first room, but I think we saw that that trigger gets entered right off the bat. So this will fire. But the room will get created and initially it doesn't have a player in it. We then want to have some public methods for setting the player and getting the player for a room. So we'll say public void set player. This guy will take a player P as a parameter. And we'll say this dot the player is equal to P. So we're just giving the ability to a room object that we can say, hey, instance of room, set your player to this guy. Now, this is all happening on the programmatic side. This has nothing to do with our visual game objects. What we're trying to do is we're trying to have our code behind matching up to what we're visually seeing. All right. And the link to that is through these triggers. When something happens over here, we're going to run over and update our objects over here to make those equal whatever is physically happening on the screen. Make sense? So we'll have a set player. We'll also have a public player get player. This guy will return this dot the player. C# does have some stuff built into it for automatic getters and setters. I typically don't use them, but if you use C# a bunch and you want to use those, that's fine. But I have a private field here. Private fields are only accessible inside the class in which they were defined. So if I want to be able to set and get those, I have to get myself public getters and setters. Okay, so now we have the ability to let a room know whether or not it is whether or not it's in a player is in there or not. So we'll go to core. So core is our eye in the sky. That's our global guy in there who can keep track of all the things that are going on in the world. He's our ability to access these objects, if you will. So right now in core, what am I remembering? Well, I'm remembering a list of game objects, the physical rooms. Not sure how I'm going to use that. Maybe a room is going to be able to get destroyed later on or something like that. If we actually want a room to disappear. In fact, maybe we do this. Maybe when a player enters a new room, the room he used to be in gets destroyed. So it's like kind of the enemy is chasing him and they keep getting less and less rooms. Be pretty easy to do, but you know, I'm just kind of giving a reason why might we be interested in keeping track of a list of all the game objects. So I'm going to add another list here. So we're going to have a list of, and if you remember correctly, well, I'll just ask it. Why did I choose a list here instead of an array list? Anybody remember? It's not something I'll test you on in this class, but it's kind of a interesting computer science concept. That is related to something we've talked about in this class. Go ahead. Tell me what you mean by that. Under the hood, a list is probably implemented to be more memory efficient because an array list is still implemented using contiguous memory, where a list is implemented using the stuff you'll learn about next semester, which is linearly linked lists, where one bucket links to another memory address that isn't necessarily right next to it. So maybe under the hood, they're a little more memory efficient, but ultimately it comes down to thread safety. So we have this idea of an object being thread safe, and we've already made some threads in this class where we have some various things happening at one time. Well, when we have, let's say, two different things happening at once, and they both try to change the same list at the same time, bad things could happen. It's an operating system concept called a race condition. So lists have built into it thread safety. If two different threads try to call the add or remove method on a list at the same time, built into list is a defensive mechanism against that. Array lists don't have that. From our perspective, we don't have to do anything special. In Java, you can accomplish something similar to this through a synchronized keyword, where you can kind of hide things inside of methods and synchronize that method, which makes sure only one guy can call that method at a time. For us in here, it's not the end of the world. We're not having so many things happen on the screen at once that a race condition is likely to happen anyways. But that's the reason we chose lists instead of array lists. For us in here, we can just say, hey, it's a collection of stuff. Specifically, this is a collection of game objects. This guy's going to be a collection of room objects. So we're going to call this guy the room goes. That's the room game objects. And we're going to call this guy the rooms. So he's holding an actual collection of the rooms that were that are in our game. We want to keep track of both of those things. And if you remember, if I go back to our prefab here, inside of our room prefab, we have the room script. And what does the room script say to do? The room script says, when you're first created, go ahead and add the game object associated with you to core. So every single room prefab, when it's first instantiated, it lets core know about its visual self, the game object that is itself. For whatever reason, we're going to use that. Okay. Now, what we can do is when a room is actually a room trigger, we have this cube there in the inside of it. When we think about what room is the player in, room is more, the room the player's in is more of like a physical space thing, right? Kind of a place on the screen. If we take the X, Y, and Z coordinates of the player, we can say, well, which room does this physically put the player inside of? So really, is this room trigger just as good of a identifier of what room you're in programmatically as the room prefab? Probably is. Okay. So what I'm going to do is in our room trigger, we have our script. So there's our room trigger script. And what I'm going to do is inside of the room trigger script, I'm going to create a private room object. We'll call this guy this room. And we'll say this room is equal to a new room object. And this is a normal plain Jane C# object. This has nothing to do with Unity. This guy right here, room, he would look just like this if we were writing a text-based C# thingy. He's not a mono behavior. He doesn't have a start. He looks like a Java object, which looks just like a C# object. So the constructor takes no parameters. He sets the player that's in that room initially to null. All right, and that's it. All right. So now when this guy first comes into existence, a room object is created, and we want to add that physical, we want to add that programmatic room object to core. So we'll go ahead and teach core. We already taught him how to hold those things. Now we're going to teach him public static void add room. This guy, the room. So we'll teach core how to add a room to its list of room objects. So we'll say core dot the rooms dot add the room. Right. So if, again, core is our singleton, he's filled up with a bunch of static fields and static methods. So if someone external to this was going to say core.add room and toss that guy an instance of the room object, he'll add it to his list. So when a room trigger first comes into existence and we create an instance of a room there, we'll go ahead and let we'll go ahead and let core know about the room we just created. That kind of links this object to this physical place in our code. Make sense? All right. So now core has this room, whatever that means. Now, when a player enters this room on trigger enter, if it's a player that enters the room, that means we need to manipulate that player. We, at the very least, want that player's. So now we're back in player. A player is going to keep track of its current room, and this is going to be of type room. So a player cares about the room they're currently in. When a player is first born, when we create a player, we'll say this dot current room is equal to null, because he's currently not in a room until we put him in a room programmatically. And then we want to add a function, it'd be called set room. Where we set the room for that player equal to some room. So somebody external to this, if he has access to the player, he can ask that player for the, well, he can tell that player, your room is me. Hand him the room object associated with that game object. All right, that's what we're going to be trying to do. All right, so I'll put some. That should give me a nice error message in my script. Prevent it from working next time. All right, so questions about any of this? That makes some sense, the direction we're trying to go here. All right, remember Easter break officially starts at 4 p.m. Tomorrow. So you will have classes earlier in the day tomorrow. I'm sure all of you will be completely in attendance, and attendance is always great the day before Easter break. But we won't have class on Friday. And I think we also don't have class on Monday, right? Monday classes resume at 4 p.m. on Monday. So of course I should give you a huge homework assignment over break. All right, no homework over break. We'll pick up here next Wednesday and keep adding stuff to it. I'd still encourage you to keep playing around with Unity if you're finding that fun, but you're going to be traveling, spending time with your family, yada, yada, yada. So have safe trips if you are going somewhere, and I'll see everybody on Wednesday next week. Yeah, it'll have the error in it right now.
I have a question.
All right, I hear you. What's your question?
Um, I've been trying to email you for some reason. I don't think it's going through.
Yeah, I have not
I
gotten an email from you. What address are you using?
my school email.
Oh, what address are you using for me?